Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I am Heena Goswami, Editorial Consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. At IGPP Expert Talks, we have been talking about elections held over the globe in 2024. And today we are here to discuss the recently concluded European Union Parliamentary elections. The European Union is a unique partnership between 27 European countries, known as Member States or EU countries. Together, they cover much of the European continent. The EU is home to around 447 million people, which is 6% of the world's population. In the aftermath of the Second World War, European Economic Community was created in 1958 with the initial aim of increasing economic cooperation between 6 countries: Belgium, Germany, France, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Since then, 22 more countries have joined, and what began as a purely economic union has evolved into an organization spanning many different policy areas, from climate, environment, and health to external relations and security, justice, and migration. Between most EU countries, people can travel freely throughout most of the continent. It has also become much easier to live and work in another country in Europe. All EU citizens have the right and freedom to choose in which country they want to study, work, or retire. Every EU country must treat EU citizens in exactly the same way as its own citizens when it comes to matters of employment, social security, and tax. The EU is governed by the principle of representative democracy, where citizens directly are represented at the EU level in the European Parliament and member states represented in the European Council and the Council of European Union. To shed some light on the functioning of EU and the recently concluded elections, today we are joined by Professor Gulshan Sachdeva. A distinguished scholar, Professor Sachdeva is faculty and former chairperson at Center for European Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is also the Jean Monod Chair and Director, Europe Area Studies Program, and Editor-in-Chief of International Studies. He is a regular contributor to print and broadcast media on both economic and security issues. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talks, sir.
Thank you, Heena, and thank you for having me for your show.
So, tell us a little briefly about what the European Union is. We understand it as sort of a unique union where nations come together as member states, give up some of their rights and decide collectively upon other issues. How does this arrangement work and what necessitated this?
Well, you're right. European Union is unique. It's a unique supranational organization. It's very difficult to compare European Union with anything else. It's not like a federation like India or United States. It's also not an organization where governments cooperate like United Nations. So what in the European Union they have done, all 27 states today, they basically, I think, in certain areas, they have given that sovereignty to some of the institutions of the European Union which they have created together. They still remain very much independent sovereign states, but in areas like, say, for example, in trade, in investment, and in many, many other areas, there are institutions of the European Union. You have European Commission, you have the Council of the European Union, you have the European Council, you have the European Parliament, and many, many more. So it means on those matters there are certain common policies at the union level, and many others they have their own would say, competencies, and this is what exactly the term they use. In certain areas, the union has competencies. In certain areas, member states have their competencies, and in some areas they have shared competencies. This is something like in India, if you would like to compare the union list, state list, and the common list. These are the areas they have been distributed. Because what they really feel is that as a result of this, many countries are very small countries within the European Union, so they would not be able to influence globally. But as a together, all these 27 countries, obviously, they would have much bigger say in global affairs and the global institutions. And they have created everything. It's treaty-based organization. You have large number of treaties, and everything is agreed, ratified by all the parliaments. So it means all the institutions, how do they work, what their roles are, what their functions are, and if there are confusion, if there are conflicts, how they need to be resolved. Everything is written in the treaties. So this is how it works.
How are elections held? Like, do parties compete domestically, or do they reach across the borders, form sort of blocks, and does the principle of one vote, one value holds true in these elections?
Well, these are very different elections. Now you have 27 countries, and all 27 countries, they have different political parties, like anywhere else. So what they do is, it's a European election, because this is election for the European Parliament. But at the same time, these are also 27 national elections, because ultimately people are voting for their own political parties, because you have different political parties in Germany, France, and Italy, and any other country in the European Union. So here what you have is, at the national level, there are certain broader rules, means members would be selected, MEPs, what they call the member of the European Parliaments, would be selected on the basis of proportionate representation, means depending on what percentage of vote they receive at the national elections, and then that number of MEPs would be selected from that particular political party. But the thresholds are different in different countries. Somewhere it is 5%, somewhere it is 3%, somewhere it is 4%, means minimum that percentage vote has to be received by that particular political party. There are 720 altogether MEPs, but it's not exactly proportionate to the population. So it means the smaller countries have slightly larger representation because they have given large. But overall, I would say the big countries, of course, will have, like Germany, France, will have much larger number of MEPs compared to others. Now, once they are elected from the national elections, then within the European Union there are groups, ideological groups, put it this way. So at the moment there are 7 groups. So these 7 groups basically represent different ideological stances. Over the year you will find that the major groups, what you have is the European People's Party, which is basically, you would say, the center-right Christian parties from Europe, all over Europe, like in the German CDU and many other conservative parties, and even earlier the UK Conservative Party was part of this. Then you have the socialist and democratic groups. So all the socialist or other kind of democratic parties within Europe, Labour Party, in fact Labour Party also used to be there, or the German Socialist Party, or the Spanish Socialist Party, French Socialist Party, they are all part of the socialist group. Then you have another new group for the last few years, which has emerged, the Renew group, which is more the centrist group, where you have the President Macron's Renaissance Party is part of that. Then you have the Greens and the left, or the extreme left party is part of that. And then you also have 2 groups which are basically outside the far right parties. The ECR, the European Group for Conservative and Reformists, and then you have Identity and Democracy Group. So these are, like if you look at, say, for example, Italian Prime Minister Meloni's party, Brothers of Italy, so they are part of ID, and then you have another, the Marine Le Pen's party. So she's part of ID and others are the ECR. So it means these are, on the Polish Law and Justice Party. So many of those parties are represented in those groups. So they join a particular group. So every political party from all 27 countries, they are part of these groups. There are also some political parties or members which are not part of any group, the independent kind of group, so they are also there. So it means within the European Parliament, what you will find very strong pro-European groups, and then you also have very kind of Eurosceptics, like the UKIP from the UK earlier, Nigel Farage, who led in the whole Brexit campaign. So he was very much against the European Union, but he was also MEP within the European Parliament. So you have the group of, this has been the part, the composition of the European Union. So in the last few elections, what we have seen is there is no majority achieved by any group. So what you have is basically coalitions which are based on issues. But of course, the two largest groups, they are the EPP, the Conservative group, and the Socialist group. They have kind of dominated, and there's on many issues there's kind of grand coalition of these two. But sometimes even if that is not enough, they also go to review or to, say for example, Greens. So on every issue there would be a coalition. But of course, the main job of the European Parliament basically is first, of course, because this is the only institution of the European Union which is directly elected by the citizens. Because others, whether you look into the European Council or the Council of the EU, where the ministers meet, and or European Council where the head of the states or the governments meet, they are elected on the national issues. Right? So they are elected first for the governments, and then only they represent here. But here what you have is people, MEPs are elected basically for European issues. So there is a democratic representation in that sense, and they are the one who basically, since they are democratic, they represent democracy in the European Union, they also kind of monitor all the functioning and all other institutions within the European Union, and they do have some influence even on the EU budget. So this is how, but the European, I think the Parliament is very, very important in that sense. But of course, over the years, the role of the European Council has also increased, and the European Commission also is very, very important. So I would say these three institutions of the European Union, apart from many others, are the kind of core institutions of the European Union, and everything is based on treaties, and this is how the things work.
In the recently concluded elections, right-wing parties such as Identity and Democracy, Eurosceptic European Conservatives, and Reformists have dominated. What has caused the shift from liberalism to conservatism? Is immigration the only issue that necessitated the shift, or are there other issues which caused this move?
Well, all these political parties which are part of these two groups, ECR and ID, these groups are not new. They have been there in the European Parliament for quite some time. And even in every country in the European Union, all these far-right parties are always present. But only difference which has happened in the last, I would say, 10-15 years, because earlier, in every country, in the way the system works in the European Union, there is a threshold, somewhere 5%, 6%, depending on, unless you get that number of votes, you are not getting into the parliament. So many of these parties were not able to kind of cross that threshold for quite some time, even if they were existing. But over the years, what we have seen that in many countries, they have crossed that threshold, and then even when they crossed the threshold, nobody wanted to kind of join them in the coalitions. But now that has also changed. In many countries today in the European Union, they are ruling governments. Like you can see now in Finland, you can see in Hungary, you can see in Italy, you can see in Czech Republic, you can see in Croatia, you can see in some of Slovakia. And they also have, their percentage has definitely increased in countries like Netherlands, Sweden. They are actually supporting the governments. And then in Germany and France, the two largest countries, they are also, and Spain. In these countries also their numbers have increased. So it's Still, they are not part of the coalitions in some of these countries, but they are very much part of the domestic political scene. So, if the issue why they have really grown up, because one issue which has really dominated the scene is immigration, because that is kind of bothering everybody. If you look at all the the surveys, Eurobarometers, which are conducted periodically in Europe, one of the key concerns of the European citizens have been immigration, apart from other issues. And what they really feel is that many of the other traditional parties, whether conservative parties or the socialist parties, they have not been able to tackle this issue effectively. So they are raising this issue again and again. And this is also happening in a situation when overall there has been economic, I would say, relative decline of Europe. And particularly after Eurozone crisis after 2008-9, there was economic worries, there was certain economic collapse in some of the countries, and then there was also terrorist incidents. So what they're kind of trying to link all these issues together, that because of immigration, you have we are not able to get jobs, outsiders are coming and getting our jobs, and then when the outsiders come, and particularly when they come from Muslim countries, there is also rise of terrorism within Europe. So they are mixing up all these issues. So they have always been anti-immigration, anti-many of the EU policies, Eurosceptic, at the same time also anti-Islam. So all these factors are playing very well in their favor. And globally there has been certain decline, and Europe in the long term, because many other countries have taken over, countries like China, India, and others, those who are coming up. So that kind of fear that many of the citizens within the European Union have not been able to gain the benefits of globalizations, others are doing it, and the traditional political parties are not doing anything about it. And so these are, and the European Union policy. So I think they have kind of used those fears, and then their numbers have increased. And then they are also supporting each other. In some of them, one political, and that's also a trend. In one hand, since they are also in the ruling coalitions. But what you can see now that after Brexit, since it was so messy, now many of these countries are not talking about exiting the European Union, but what they are kind of advocating is that they want to change certain things, certain policies of the EU from within. So that's why they are saying, you give us votes, so we will be able to kind of change even the whole structure and nature of the European Union, which will benefit us. So it's more of issues of immigration, nationalism, Islam, and overall, in fact, the multiculturalism in Europe has not really worked. So people are coming from outside, but they have not been able to assimilate or integrate within the European societies, European culture. So that's creating a different kind of clash. So I think they're using all these, I would say, issues and raising those voices, and then somehow they are resonating with some of the citizens, large number of citizens, I would say, within some of the countries.
My next question is a bit speculative. I'm not sure if there's like a straightforward answer to it. But world over, whether it's in Europe, America, South Asia, we are seeing a rise of right-wing parties and increased conservatism. Why is it that with internet, with access to literacy, books, we have an increased awareness of other cultures around the globe, and yet it seems counterintuitive that there's a rise in conservatism, or like simply put, why this disenchantment with liberalism?
Well, one is the historical sense. There are also phases. There are phases when certain ideological things will go up and then go down. And the Europe has its very, I would say, specific history. Within Europe, after the Second World War, they knew that one of the major reasons why Europe was in a very difficult situation after the Second World War, where before that they were dominating the whole world. They were the colonizers, and immediately after the Second World War, the whole Europe was destroyed, the whole infrastructure was destroyed, and then they were kind of economically and militarily became dependent on the United States, and then you had the next to them was the Soviet Union. So then they were basically discussing, I mean, there were a lot of debates at that point of time in Europe, why Europe has reached to that stage. So obviously they identified that one of the major causes of that was nationalism, rise of nationalism, destructive nationalism in some of the countries in Europe. So they created many institutions within the European countries that rise, the nationalist tendencies do not rise again. So that's why all these thresholds, all those kind of restrictions that some of these these kind of political ideologies should not really prosper within the European Union because of that Europe has really suffered. But over decades, those ideologies did not die. As I said, many of these political parties were still there. But now in the last 15-20 years, there has been certain ground which has been in their favor. Because what they feel is, because so long as the globalization was benefiting, because today European economy is all the European economies are very much integrated among themselves. It's just one economy in a sense. At the same time, they are also very much integrated in the global economy. And this, during the whole initial phases of globalization, I would say the Europeans really benefited, and many other countries also benefited. But what they now feel is that many of the citizens within Europe, they have somehow left behind. They have not been able to, at least the perception they have that they have not been able to get that benefit. And because the demographic profile of Europe is that they will need people from outside, because there is a decline. I mean, you can continue to improve your productivity, but still you will need some more people. So people are coming from outside. That has always been the case in Europe. But so long as the people were coming from the neighboring countries within Europe, it was all right. But when people come from outside with different ideologies, with different colors, and also with different religions, and when they are not able to kind of fully assimilate within the European societies, that created a different situation. And that created a very, I would say, fertile ground for some of these political parties within Europe. And then there are also, as I said, the global trends. So this is not just happening in Europe. This has happened. We have seen Donald Trump in Europe, and many other countries, in Brazil, in many other countries all over the world. So there are global trends where people have now disillusioned with the globalization, and then there are also connections, and then all the problems what Europe has been facing, because they faced the Eurozone crisis. Then you have the refugee crisis in 2015, very serious one, and then you have pandemic. Then you have the war again, Yugoslavia, and now in Ukraine. So as a result of that, your living conditions have gone down for a large number of people. Cost of living has gone up. Now the energy prices have gone up. So many factors which are working in favor of many of these political parties, and they are using it. Now, whether they have any answer, nobody knows, because still. You will see that, but they would be able to, I would say, change or at least influence the policy, even if the numbers are not there in the European Parliament. Because if today all other groups, which are, I would say, pro-Europe groups, or I would say progressive groups within, so they still have more than 60% seats. So it means if they have a coalition together, they will be able to push for policies. But the EPP, the largest political party, largest political group within the European Party, within the European Parliament, that itself is also a very conservative group. In fact, the Fidesz, the far-right party in Hungary, till very recently, actually, they were part of the EPP. So it means there was a possibility that if you have EPP and taking help from these two groups, that would have been a very, I would say, difficult combination, because then it was really going towards the right. But now what you have is still other parties are also there. So maybe to large number of policies, whether you look at climate change, whether you look at economic policies, and other, still you have that kind of progressive, centrist kind of, I would say, a coalition which will be able to push. But of course, they will also be able to, I would say, influence some of these policies, particularly on the climate change and other issues. Those are the kind of policies.
one of the fallouts of the rise of their dominance or rise in the popularity of the right-wing parties has been that, even the parties who were otherwise progressive, centre-right, or sort of on the spectrum of left, they have also started taking harder stances on issues like immigration. Post the election, we saw that the French President Emmanuel Macron called for dissolving the National Assembly and called for elections. Do you think the result itself would lead to some, churning in politics of these nations domestically, and there would be like sort of change in presidents, prime ministers at the national level?
Well, I mean, at one level, everything is connected because ultimately citizens are voting. But European elections are, in a sense, different than national elections. And the kind of results sometimes you see in the European elections may not happen automatically in the national elections because the systems are different. For example, you mentioned France. Now, in France, yes, President Macron party has suffered a very humiliating defeat because they got less than 15%, around 15% votes, and then the National Rally of Marine Le Pen got about 32, and even the other far-right party, Conquest, also got about 6-7%, so close to about 40% together. But for the national elections, it's a two-round elections, means you have to get 50% votes. Because in the first round, if no candidate is able to get 50%, then you go to the second round, and in the second round, any candidate which is more than 12.5% of the total votes, all of them would be again. So ultimately, you need at least 50%. And historically, French has kind of voted very tactically. Definitely the second round. So maybe I think this is the gamble President Macron has playing, because he feels that maybe ultimately they will not be able to get the kind of numbers they are hoping. But in any way, he doesn't have majority in the national parliament. I mean, his party, because the French system is different, where the president elections are different, the parliament elections are different. The presidency is very, very powerful, so president can dissolve parliament anytime, which as he has done now. So if he is able to get it, his party, then of course the next 3 years he will be able to rule more effectively, because these are last 3 years, because in the French constitution you can't have a president more than twice, so he loses second term. But even if he is not able to do it, then of course he has to appoint a new prime minister from the opposition, possibly from the far right party. So in that case, he'll have relatively less influence in the domestic policy, but still he's trying to challenge, in a sense, that for the next 27 elections of the presidential election. Before that only, you want to kind of show the people that simply they cannot run the elections, or they cannot win the elections. So even if they win the elections, they have to show governance for the next 2 years for the domestic issues. And if they falter there, then you'll have a problem in the 27 elections for them. So it's a strategic, I would say, very tactical move he has made. We do not know how the result of that would be, because a similar kind of thing was also done by in Britain for calling Brexit, and then after that things went differently. So we do not really know, because this is what exactly at that time Cameroon has kind of played, that let them just have, and then try to act the matter forever. But that didn't happen. You have Brexit as a result. So as a result of this, what would happen if they win, and then perhaps they become bigger even for the next elections, or they are able to control them? We do not know. But of course, there is a pressure now in every country, including in Germany and other places, where they have done very good. Their performance is good for all these far right parties. So there is certain pressure, and there is also happening some tendency in Belgium and other places, because the prime minister is going to resign there, because anyway there were also national elections along with that. So there is, but it's not all in that sense, because if you look, still even you look today, 3 major countries, France, Germany, and Spain, are still ruled by socialist or centrist parties. I mean, so it's not that it's just everything is dominated by, but their influence is definitely increased.
One of the pillars of the ideologies of the right-wing party is definitely nationalism. And as we saw in the case of Britain, that rise of conservatism domestically, there was a call for leaving Britain, for leaving EU in the Britain, and that led to Brexit. Although you mentioned that such anti-EU stances have been reduced by these parties in the recent past, but do you think that once, if, for example, in France, if a right-wing party was to come to power, or in Belgium or in other countries, there would be increased call for leaving EU and having sort of like a national, doing away with EU in totality?
Well, that was a danger earlier, as I mentioned. I mean, when the Brexit debates were happening, then there were people who were talking about Brexit, about Fexit, about all these exits. But the way I think the situation is in UK after Brexit and the whole process, the whole difficulties, the whole process of exiting the European Union itself, I think after that most of the citizens have realized that it's good to be inside the European Union and also good to be in the Eurozone. Even in Greece, when they were facing all these problems with the single currency, no political party in Greece, from the extreme left to extreme right, they never mentioned that we want to move out from euro, single currency. So now, since the economies have integrated so much, and citizens are getting the benefits of integration is felt by everyone. So I don't think all these political parties, even the far-right political parties, have also realized that citizens are not thinking about exiting any of the institutions, policies of the European Union. So what they really want to do is that the EU has become more bureaucratic, and many of these policies are very much elite-oriented. They are not, taking care of the ordinary citizens. So we have to intervene there, and particularly even the whole climate policies, because what they feel is the green transition is useful, which everybody agrees, even all these far-right parties. But the cost of green transition is very high, particularly for the consumer and for the small industries and others. So we need to make an intervention. And also, moving away from nuclear energy is also not really a very good option, as they've started in Germany, but many of these far-right parties would say that no, that's also a good option, continue with the nuclear power as well. So it means they want to change policies. They don't want to leave European Union or the institutions of the European Union, policies of the European Union, but to influence. And similarly, on immigration, they feel that no, EU should not be deciding about this. And anyway, the competency on immigration, on migration-related issues are with the member states anyway. So they want to keep that thing within the member states, that there should not be, every country must decide if they want a number of people. So there should not be any kind of direction from the European Union on the member state. So these are the kind of influences one can see. Even if they come to rule some of the governments within the European Union, or even if they have more influence within the European Parliament, so they would like to influence. And in fact, now there's a possibility that all these groups, now there are two groups, and there are certain parties which are not part of any group, like the far-right party from Germany or Fidesz in Hungary. So they also would like to be part. I mean, now the effort has been that why don't we just bring all these parties together and form a single super group of all these parties, because then they might become second largest group within the European Union. So then they have much more influence and profile within the Europe. This is what I think the next move they would like to do.
In terms of foreign policy, how much do these far-right parties differ from their centre-right and left counterparts? And would we see in near future any shift in Europe's policy towards Russia, Israel, and India and China? I focus on Russia and Israel because they are theatres of conflict at the moment, and India and China because...
Yeah, I mean, on foreign policy issues, I think they still there is very, I would say, not major difference on many of the policies. Because so far, anyway, most of these far-right parties have focused more on domestic issues. On foreign policy, there is a certain difference they used to have about Russia, because some of these countries were less critical, or they had relatively, I would say, sympathetic attitudes toward Russia. Not all of them, but few of them. But now, after Ukraine war, I think things are changing there also. Similarly, about China, they have been more critical about China, but at the same time, even the European Union itself, and even the EPP and many of the governments within the European Union also, they are becoming very critical of China. In fact, I would say some of the main leaders, you look at the German Chancellor or the French President, they have been rather more, I would say, balanced approach, taking balanced approach toward China, but some of these other institutions, particularly you look at, say, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has been quite, I would say, strong position on China. And similarly on Indo-Pacific, I think all of them are roughly on the same state, because everybody wants to have more influence in the Indo-Pacific. On India, I don't think there's any major change. Because most of these political parties, they do favor India. In fact, I would say that they are more favorable towards India compared to even other, because some of the socialist and other parties, they have certain critical attitudes about India, about human rights, about democracy and many other problems within India. But these many of these far right parties, they really feel that India is a very good partner with whom we should be working. So on foreign policy issues, I would rather think, apart from nuances here or there, I don't see any major change. Because you can see, even if in the countries when they are actually ruling, look at Italy or you look at Hungary. I mean, Hungary, of course, you can see clear-cut change that they are very pro-Russia and also pro-China, but not in many other countries. There could be a little bit change in the nuances, the way they would like to put it, but the broader foreign policy, I don't see any major changes happening here.
Thank you so much for joining us.